Hi, everybody. I'm TammyJo. This is Peter. And today we're going to talk about this movie that I fell in love with and convinced Peter to watch and talk to me about on Netflix called Love and Leashes. And before we start talking about it, I want to say a couple of things so that you don't get the wrong idea about what we're trying to do in this review and discussion. Number one, neither of us are Korean. Neither of us know the Korean language, either how to speak it or how to understand it when we hear it or how to read it. So we are purely reviewing this movie as a Canadian and an American who've watched this movie on Netflix. Okay. We will be discussing this movie in detail. So if you don't like spoilers, just stop right now. Don't keep watching because we're really going to discuss it in detail. And finally, we may be using explicit language when we discuss it. We're going to be talking about sex, gender, BDSM, sexism, all that stuff. So if that makes you uncomfortable, again, you don't have to watch the video. Just so everyone knows, I do have a lot of notes and we created an outline, but we have not scripted this. So you can see Peter's notes too. So we're just talking about this. So who am I? I am an author and a alternative sexuality activist. I am still an activist, though not perhaps as much as I was before the pandemic, though the number of hours of classes I've taught online would say otherwise. But I've been part of the Kink community and working on this alternative sexuality stuff for over 3 decades now. So Peter, would you introduce yourself?
My name is Peter Tupper. I have been involved in the kink world for over 25 years at least. For the last, since about 2005, I've been researching the history of SM. And in 2018, I published a book called A Lover's Pinch, A Cultural History of Sadomasochism. Right now, I'm working on another nonfiction book called, the working title is The Celluloid Dungeon, and it's about SM in mainstream books, not books, but films, television, and even in video games. So I'm glad that TammyJo brought Love and Leashes to my attention, and it's definitely something of mutual interest to us.
Yeah. So how do we know each other? I think that's a big question. I was trying to remember all the details.
We met way back when Usenet was the cutting edge of internet technology. In fact, it was, if I remember correctly, it was a group based on Spider Robinson's Callahan's Cross Time Saloon group, and we met there and only sort of migrated over into sort of the alt.sex.bondage and later sexuality. I believe it was BDSM-bondage, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a consensual mistress-slave relationship with daily reports and exchange of gifts and things like that. And we were both fiction writers, so we were sending stories to each other.
And I still have a lot of those.
Thank you. I sent my first trip to New York. I believe that was '97. And I visited you and your husband for, I believe it was 9 days, got to see the vault, the Hellfire, neither of which are there anymore, sad to say, and other interesting, fascinating places in New York, and get to see you, TammyJo, of course, which was awesome. And so, yeah, and we've stayed in touch since then.
Yeah, I still have like photos from when you visited and great memories of that time and everything. I think we had one of my favorite scenes ever in a public dungeon. So we come to this watching this movie about a relationship, female dominant, male submissive relationship, as people who've had this type of relationship. not just with each
Yes.
other, but other people. So we kind of know what we're talking about, I would say.
Yep.
All right. Well, let me summarize this movie. I'm going to try to do it very succinctly. This is a
Mm.
romantic comedy about two people working at a children's network who explore a femdom male sub BDSM relationship that challenges their self-identities, their definitions of love, and the cultural norms around them. So
Yep.
it's,
That about covers it.
yeah. So we're going to get more in detail here. So first of all, did you like this movie?
Yes, I did. I mean, in my research, I've been seeing a lot of mainstream movies about SM. And to be honest, most of them I don't like very much in the way they treat SM. This is, I think, both even like movies that are about female dominant, male submissive relationships. Very often they'll do sort of a dodge in which the man will say, like, I love you, but I'm not submissive to you. That's how Preaching to the Perverted ended.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that. So I think it's rare to see a movie in which you have a male dom female sub relationship, and both of the parties sort of stay in that role, but do develop in that role. And secondly, it's also kind of rare to see an exploration of a female dominant who's not a professional, who's not in at least related to the world of sex work. Like Bonding, which was had a couple of seasons on Netflix the past few years, is primarily about a pro dom, not a person who's doing it because she enjoys it for its own sake.
Yeah, and I agree. There are many mainstream and what I would call sort of on the edge of mainstream movies out there that have kink elements in them. And I get so tired of, well, either it's always like some sort of professional relationship, so there's a money exchange, or there's some sort of criminal element, like someone gets murdered, or it turns out they're hiding money or something like that. Or, and this is the one I probably hate the most actually, is someone has a mental illness. And it's portrayed as though this is a part of that mental illness, or this is somehow helping to treat that mental illness. And those things are they're not there at all. This is really a very normal, these are normal people.
They emphasize that. Like at one point, Ji-hoo, the male lead, and I apologize in advance that we're probably mispronouncing the names of these people. Ji-hoo, the male lead, like at one point, Hannah, his ex, says, "Were you abused as a child or something?" And he says, "No, that's just the way I am." And so some people do judge them harshly, but they both gain self-acceptance through the film. So it doesn't pathologize their interests, which was good.
So let's talk about this. There are two main characters, I would say. So since you mentioned Ji-hoo, let's keep talking about Ji-hoo. He is the male lead. And he's sort of, what would you call it? Like middle management in this children's network. So he transfers into a department, the PR department, and he's like the assistant manager. And I found him, I mean, personally as a female dominant, I found him at sometimes annoying, but I also found him realistic in that he has a lot of self-doubt and self-loathing and fear, a lot of fear, which I think is part of what I found annoying. But I think the main female character also finds that annoying over time.
I think he's Ji-hoo, but I also think there's also this element of desperation to him, that like he kind of like comes on too strong to her at times, and he and I get the I guess this is where I would like to know more about the kink scene, the kink culture in Korea, because I get the impression he's like me, have never even met a person, met face to face another kinky person. Like both of the two leads, they talk on online forums,
Mm-hmm.
and they apparently provide support and things like that. But I get the impression that like he's very isolated. He has no, he's I think he feels a lot of shame in it. And so that's why, from his experience with his ex Hana, and then when he meets Ji Woo, the female lead, he like sees that she's, at least interested in dominance. He just like, please. And it's like,
Yes.
okay, chill
Yes.
out, my
Yes,
friend.
the scene
Uh,
after she takes him to the hospital, and this is
yeah,
kind of missing. The movie, by the way, is based on a online webtoon that is
yeah,
currently being translated into English. And I've read what's been translated so far, and in it we have more of an idea of why Jiwoo reacts so strongly. So at one point, to hide from her, he puts on the mascot outfit for one of the characters of the
yeah,
children's network because he's in the storage room where it is. And of course, she knows it's him. She recognizes his voice because she's pretty on the ball. She's like very aware of what is going on, even if she's not sure what it always means. She's like aware, and
yeah,
he like freaks out and struggles and falls down, and she's like, oh my god, you've hit your head, you have to go to the hospital. And in the webtoon, it makes it clear because we see her thinking about things more. Apparently she had a relative who died from a concussion, and this is why she's like, no, you're going to the hospital right now. But
yeah,
the scene outside in the hospital is exactly what you're talking about. As soon as he's offered one little bit of hope that there's someone like him, he just goes over the top.
yep,
And he does this a couple times. By the end of the movie, she makes a comment to him like, there you go again, you're making assumptions again. And this is where I can say that I was 100% with her. I'm like, I would have drawn that line a little earlier, but you do you. This assumptions that he keeps making is really wearing. And he just assumes because she seems understanding. And she mentions that she is kind of bossy at times and people think she's kind of cold. He just assumes that means that she must be interested in kink.
mm,
And, and what I found really interesting is that she doesn't automatically reject him for that. She's
yeah,
kind of like, oh, now everything starts falling into place.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. We I suggest we talk about Ji Woo too.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so she's another worker in the PR department. So she's actually his subordinate in the hierarchy. And early on, we get to see that she's sort of she's very blunt. She's very competent, and there's a lot of friction between her and the department chief, who's like very, in a very sexist way, kind of demeaning to her and things like that. So, and I think that the implication is that like that if in a more meritocratic culture, she would have promoted instead of having Jihu brought over in brought over to be the assistant manager. So I think there's an element of friction there, but she's very, in fact, I would argue that she's more the protagonist than him is, because we get a lot from her perspective. We see her background, like, she's close to her mother. There's she's frustrated with the sexism in the corporate world she lives in, that she doesn't get credit for her work, and her she seems to have like not be interested in the usual sort of traditionally female courtship system. And So now there's a meet cute. So this has rom-com DNA in it. So they have a meet cute. Their names are almost identical. They have the same surname. And she accidentally picks up a package at work meant for him, which contains a leather studded collar with the word Miho. And I don't think they ever told us what that meant.
No,
What's
I tried to look it up, and
yeah.
the closest I get is something about maybe stars or something, but
Yeah,
I'm
maybe
thinking
it's
it's
like a
not, she
maybe.
mentions it's an odd name, so I'm thinking it's
eh,
not like a common thing in Korea either. Um,
okay, yeah, but she opens it up and finds a studded leather collar with a plate that says Miho, and a leash, and and that's their meet cute, because he's desperate to keep her from finding this, and there's like this. So um really, that's the only, I think they could have like scrubbed that whole thing about having similar names, but whatever. We're not here to critique the screenwriting. um and he tries to excuse it as for his dog, but she sees the coupon in the box, which shows. Now, the coupon in the box shows a woman wearing the collar with a man holding the leash.
mhm.
And and she just sort of like is completely nonplussed about this, but she says, you shouldn't throw away a coupon, might be worth something. So he just like, she knows, but she just says nothing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
And
later
then,
on,
what do you think about that collar while we're on it? I thought it was kind of like a little over the top. It's very large, it's very
yeah.
showy. But I do like, I don't know if you noticed this detail, when he runs by her and grabs her, to help himself calm down, he actually rubs his thumb across one of the
Mhm.
spikes and kind of makes like a pained expression for like just a little bit of a second. And that like seems to
Yeah.
calm him down.
Yeah. Good observation. Yeah. Now, if I remember correctly, okay. Now, how's that work? So we often have like her researching stuff online,
Yeah.
Ji Woo. Now, there's that bit where she's out running at night, and she walks by an adult store where there's a window display of like,
Which is like a block from her house.
apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Like, whoa,
did you just not notice it
I
before? I don't know.
guess.
Well, I don't know how like they may have. I don't know what the laws are about like, um, you know, those kind of that kind of retail in Korea.
Yeah.
Um, well, I mean, like, I don't know about where you're from, but where I'm from, they sell like vibrators and things like that in drugstores. But anyway, um, so she sees the display, and she has this fantasy where she's like looking into the store, and Ji Hoo is there in like a dark suit, and he's holding the whip, and he moves to put the collar on her. This is all fantasy, but that's where she stops and sort of very calmly says, "No, thank you. I don't even like wearing turtlenecks."
And I
And
100% related to that actually.
yeah, but I guess it's like, so she at this point is assuming that he's a dom, and that's like she's sort of aborting the fantasy at that point. It's only later on, I think it's like after the hospital scene, that she realizes he's a sub, and that he goes, and so that changes everything, and she's sort of reevaluating as she goes.
Yeah, she does that. She's very meticulous.
Oh.
She observes a lot of things, but like I said, it doesn't always, she doesn't always put two and two together immediately. So it's when he literally says, like, you can treat me as a dog outside the hospital. And then she's like, she's like, oh, no, my tendencies are not how you're interpreting it. And then she's like, oh, wait, what did you just said, oh, that collar's for you. And it's like, click, click,
Mm-hmm.
click.
Yeah.
So yeah, she does a lot of research. All of it appears to be online.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get to that. We're going to talk about all the scenes they had, which I had a couple issues about, but I kept telling myself, this is a movie. It's a movie. It's a fantasy. Don't
Yeah.
freak out. But yeah, she researches things, but I agree with you. I think this movie is a little bit more about her journey of self-discovery. He also has self-discovery in it, but we see into her head a lot more than
Yeah,
him. And we see her reactions post scenes more than him. We see more
yeah,
about her home life and her work life. And so
yeah,
here's a question to you. Do
yeah.
you think that she always had these interests and just did not have the language or the concepts to research them before she met him?
I think that's what the film's saying, is that this is a relationship style that she's suited to, and it's just she may have just never encountered the idea. Um, and that's and so, by whatever fortune, they've come together, and this is something that once she connects with it, she feels drawn to. Although, like, I mean, she's definitely. I mean, I'm watching her costumes, for example. Like, she's only once do we see her in like a stereotypical dominatrix outfit, and I think that was like the brick room with all the mirrors,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when she's wearing like the leather or pleather dress with the buckles and stuff. So the rest of the time she's like um uh wearing relatively, sometimes it's much more casual, ordinary wear. Sometimes it's a bit more uh sometimes it's a bit more sexy, like, but not like lingerie. It's like she'll wear like a long black dress or something like
Yeah.
that. So she's not like so I think she's like finding her own style.
Mm-hmm.
And like I thought was I was you see, like in the scene where he gives her shoes, for example, like I was thinking about that because like like the stereotypical dominatrix high-heeled shoe
Mm-hmm.
is, or boot, that's a thing, and not everybody likes that, not everybody wants to wear that. But she, and I'm also wondering how he knew her shoe size, but she seems to like seize upon that. And like I think you later on you see her wearing higher heels, even in the office.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and so I think that she's developed, yeah, so I think there's a realistic sense of her developing her own taste and identity, and style, because she tries different things, and she tries um and she puts a lot of care into it. Like we see her trying the flogger, we see her trying the little feather tickler thing. um I love that bit where she's practicing rope bondage on the stuffed toy of her TV show.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's
Well,
practicing
yeah. And we'll get, oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, we'll get to that later, but
Yeah.
yeah. So, and so that's an interesting element. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see her progression. I don't think I'm drawing kind of a blank about other movies that have explored in a relatively realistic way a woman moving into sort of that position. And like she doesn't, not everything works perfectly. Like the whole bit where she wants to handcuff them together,
Mm-hmm.
like you can tell she didn't think that through. Like they have to, sort of climb out of the car
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And um, so it's like it's uh, it's it's weird that sometimes some of the more like comic depictions of kink have actually been in a weird way more realistic. That
Mm-hmm.
they show people not being perfect. Like there was a parody of 50 Shades of Grey called 50 Shades of Black.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a scene where like he tries to tickle the woman when she's blindfolded, and she accidentally kicks out and kicks him across the room and against the wall.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, I mean, it's meant to be a joke, but I can so easily imagine that happening for real. That like you tickle somebody and they, even though they don't mean to, they accidentally kick you across the room.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, so Oh, sorry, I've talked a lot. You go. You go.
Yeah, I think, the movie begins with a voiceover by
Yeah.
a minor off-screen character whom we never see except as an avatar and on a video. And I'm going to ask you a question later when we get to that about, I think it might actually be someone we do see.
Yeah.
Um, and they're saying, like, you can't have a relationship without someone having slightly more power than someone else.
Mm.
And sometimes some of us want that. And as we're doing that, we see her walking. We see Jiwoo walking, and we see Jihu walking, and they kind of see each other. And I think we're supposed to believe that both of them inside their heads are kind of thinking something similar like that. Like, I can't have this egalitarian relationship. It's not what I
Yeah.
want. It's not going to work because it's not realistic anyway. And so it sets us up for they're going to get together and this is sort of relationship they're going to have. Let's move on to the minor characters because I think talking about them will help us have even more insights to
Yeah.
Jiwoo and Jihu. I'd like to start with Jiwoo's mother because she's a
Yeah.
hoot and a half, even though she doesn't have a separate name. She's just her mother. Um, I'm not sure if they live together or not. Um, you
Yeah.
know,
I'm not sure either.
I think maybe they don't because her mother comes over when she's, upset about something that happens in the relationship and decided to stay home and like buys her porridge and brings it over to her. But at the
Yeah.
same time, we mentioned already when Ji Woo is out for a run, she stops by this sex shop, literally like less than a block from her house, and her mother sees her and like, oh, hey, are you interested in those things? You want to go in? I'll buy you something, and her mom's just like,
Yeah.
you know, how would, I mean, I can't even imagine having a mother like that because to me, she
Yeah.
reads as very supportive and empowering whenever we
Well,
see her.
she's supportive, but there does seem to be like a sort of an old-fashioned approach to, to mating, to courtship and mating, that she's urging Jiwoo towards, that Jiwoo doesn't want to go to.
Yeah, it's like a double standard, right? She's like, never
Yeah.
let the guy get the upper hand, but you also don't make the first move. So
Yeah,
it's like
exactly. That
the
all
mother is struggling
all
with,
that kind of, maybe it's that like you're supposed to be in charge, but you can't make it look like you're in charge. It's all
yeah,
this sort of soft power thing. And Ji Woo is thinking, well, why do I have to hide my power? Why can't I just be upfront about it?
yeah. I believe she says, she's not a rabbit and women hunted too. And her mother basically says, well, then go out and hunt. Basically go out and
Hmm.
hunt them because life's boring.
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay, mom,
Yeah.
eat your chips and, tell me more conflicting information. But I thought her mother was, sort of this interesting home life that we get. And then later her mother really stands up for her because, in a lot of rom-coms, you have the situation where they almost break up and they
Yeah.
get back together. And that happens here too.
Mm.
And the mother is just, when Jihu shows up, like, hey, your daughter's not answering her phone. I'm a colleague. And mother's just flat out says, are you just a colleague? Because if you were just a colleague, she wouldn't be blocking you on the phone.
Mm.
And so the mother is just like, she is aware. And I think we have these stereotypes that a lot of times mothers are very much like, you got to get married, you got to have the grandkids. And she isn't played that way at all.
Yeah.
She may want that, but she's certainly not harassing Jiwoo to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, there's questions about family dynamics and gender roles in Korean society that we're probably not qualified to address here.
Yeah.
Now, another character that interests me is Jaime, who is the bar owner. It's a combination bar and dog park, which is an interesting thing.
Yeah, is it like a dog cafe, sort of like a cat
I
cafe?
It's like, well, except it seems to be a bar, like everybody's drinking there, drinking
Yeah.
alcohol there, but there's also like it opens onto a closed in little grassy space where people can play around with dogs and things. So, and like Ji Woo hangs out there, and Ji Woo, sorry, Jaime, the owner, uh, she has her own like sort of, she has a younger guy who works for her and looks after the dogs, and she even also compares him to a dog, like says he's more like the dog than the dogs are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess it's like she's also interested in SM, although it's not clear if she like also feels dominant or if she feels like sub, because like there's a whole scene that goes between her and a guy she meets that goes very wrong, and um and she gets very upset. Yeah, so do we want to go into that scene or do we want to leave that for later?
I mean, I can just mark it off my list if we want to talk about it now.
Okay.
I mean, it's sort
Yeah.
of it does. I mean, if we put it off, we can talk about it kind of in order. But in that case, the scene that you're talking about, where she goes on this date, she's put herself forward as a sub.
Yeah.
But she is definitely not any sort of stereotypical sub. I mean, she owns a business. She's in charge. She's come
Yeah.
prepared. She's come prepared if things go sideways, which they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I noticed she has had like a little tattoo on her upper left chest, and I think that
yeah,
might be sort of to imply that she's like a bit sort of she's like a bit lower class or something. That's purely a guess. Maybe it's just
or maybe more edgy, because
maybe, yeah.
she criticizes Ji Woo as being old fashioned a couple of times.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, yeah. So it's like, but yeah, so I mean, she also, so it does go badly that the guy tries to come on too strong with her. And I mean, she does get the upper hand just in time because like she called for help from Ji Woo and Ji Hoo. But she's very upset afterwards and they have to drive her home and she's crying and stuff. So and she does talk about like some real issues, like she can't go to the police about this because it would probably be ignored and things like that. So and also like she gets dick pics when she put her profile out there, which I'm sure every woman in the scene has a tale to tell about. Yeah, so that was like, yeah, that coincided with their sort of stumble between Ji Woo and Ji Hoo, because I believe that's when Ji Woo says, I think we, in addition to just playing together, we should also, date in a more companionate way. And that's when Ji Hoo says, I think we should stay just as play partners.
yeah.
And that's their emotional stumbling block.
Yeah.
But
well, I think
but she's
Himi also functions as sort of this truth teller in the story, because I think Ji Woo is not just a customer. I think they've become friends.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they were friends before or they became friends. And she goes there and comments, that she likes to hang out there and pet the dogs and have somebody. And she's like trying to ask her advice, but still protect his privacy. And so it's confusing about what's going on. But then later when she sees what they're doing and stuff, she's just like, oh, okay. And when Ji Hoo comes and I think he considers that she would be sympathetic to him. And she is to a degree, but she's not as sympathetic as I believe he was hoping for. And she basically, tells him, you're taking way too much responsibility for these things. Like, you didn't make her do anything. It's pretty clear that Ji Woo is only doing things that she wants to try out. Most of the time, she's the one deciding what they're going to do and when. But then she also says, you're not taking enough responsibility for your own feelings and who you are as a person, and you need to just stop.
Yeah.
and
And
take
that's
responsibility.
the crux of like his character development, because it's like he's he's it's not just I believe in your note you called it self-loathing, but I think it's a slightly different element of shame. It's the sense
Mhm.
that other people don't like me, and I think I'm sort of like going out on a limb here, but I think that's a more potent thing in Asian cultures than Western. The idea that they your culture is built around the idea of group approval, and he feels ashamed of that, but also and also that he's not, like, he's willing to be physically vulnerable, but he's not willing to be emotionally vulnerable.
Yeah.
So he'll be candle waxed, flogged, what have you, and he loves it, but he's that kind of next level intimacy is not something that emotional intimacy is something he's afraid of.
Yeah.
Especially since, like, the last person he was involved with just rejected him and basically, like, you know acted like, just by telling him he somehow hurt her, personally.
Yeah, let's talk about her.
Hannah,
So
yeah.
Hana is Jihu's ex-girlfriend, or I get the impression they might have been engaged or definitely heading in that way, because it
Yeah,
really hits him hard when she flat out says, "You're disgusting, you're sick,
yeah,
you need to go to therapy." And the way she treats him afterwards, and the way that he just accepts it, suggests to me, as I don't believe I've ever done this myself, but I have certainly had partners who've had the experience where they've just been in an abusive relationship, where the relationship wasn't like I'm hitting you or things. It's basically I'm using you.
yeah,
You are always there to provide my emotional support and my needs, and I belittle you constantly. How dare you ask for anything back? And that seems to be,
yeah,
it makes me wonder if that's what the relationship wasn't like to begin with.
yeah.
But
Hannah, like, just drops in and says, I'm hungry, buy me lunch, or whatever, or I had a bad day or something, I'm just gonna sit here and drink beer out of a can in your kitchen, regardless of whether you're expecting guests.
yeah.
um and I think it's like, I mean, I think it's like, that, that she's basically using that shame to manipulate him,
Mm-hmm.
and to get him to do things for her. There's an interesting element too, because, like, when he talks about, like, I think in one of the flashback scenes, no, it wasn't a flashback scene, but it's like they talk together, or was it? Anyway, there's a point at which he says, you enjoyed it when we were, like, biting and spanking each other.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, but it's basically like, once he actually brought up the idea of, like, sort of like naming it,
Yeah.
that's when she backed away and, like, felt, oh, you're sick, that's not, like, then she starts shaming him. And I found that very odd, because it's like, it's almost like, if they do it and she enjoys it, but it's the social status of it that shames her. She's like made this deal in her head that if I do this, it doesn't count as a perversion or whatever. um it's because, my social status hasn't changed. And yeah, so she remains very, yeah, like, he for example, she comes in, she just smashes this dinner he worked so hard on for Jiwoo, and he just stands there and does nothing to stop her.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. And
yeah.
on the other hand, I know that when numerous studies have been done about people's behavior. So where I live right now is a university which has the Kinsey Institute. And so the Kinsey and other organizations and other scholars have studied this. When you ask people if they're into S&M or kink or BDSM or stuff, it's usually like less than 10% of people will agree with
Mm.
those terms. But then you get like 40, 50% of people who have done activities that we might
Yeah.
say fall within that umbrella. So I think it's sort of like what she's thinking is, as long as it was just how they were making love, then that's okay.
Yeah.
And the reason he says he wants to tell her is he wants to be honest with her. And she's basically like, well, I wish, you shouldn't have been honest with me.
Yeah. I think it's like, you know, like people who like, men on the down low, or other forms of like people who have sex with people of the same gender, but, don't identify as homosexual or lesbian or bisexual.
Mm-hmm.
And like they'll do some logical contrivance about how they don't have to change their identity. They can retain their self-image as heterosexual. And the I think that she's doing that there. And I think that ties into an ongoing question here of like identity of self-image, and like the public self versus the private self.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and that ties into sort of the climax of the whole story, which we may not want to get to at this point.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Yeah.
I got a couple more characters here on the list. Let's talk about Yuna, who's
Yuna is,
Jiwoo's friend at work. And
yeah,
I think
I think
she may
she's,
be like perhaps the highest ranking woman in the PR department, because at the end, she's like the one who's giving orders.
oh, okay. So maybe
Um,
it's like, I wasn't sure about that. I got the impression that Yuna and Jiwoo were equal, more or less equals, and that she got, maybe that is what happened, is that she got like, when all those secrets come out at the corporation, apparently a lot of people either got fired or disciplined or demoted or whatever, and so she got promoted up. So it may have just been that it wasn't necessarily that she had rank over Jiwoo. It just may have just been that she was there, she had seniority, she didn't have this whole disciplinary thing
yeah.
attached to her, so they just moved her up to the top.
Yeah, she also doesn't seem to have a problem. Like at one point, they're in the boardroom, and their intern's been promoted to full time, and she says, "Well, maybe he should have a mentor."
Yeah.
Because she's figured out how to play their manager.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, that's a great idea." And so I feel like she knows how to play that power game that's going on in their office, and that she, you know, he like at
Yeah.
one point they're going to order out, and she's like, okay, she's playing with it, but of course Jiwoo is not. I was unclear exactly what Jiwoo's job is, because sometimes she seems very much like the person who's doing the financials, but then at other times she's doing other jobs, like she's dealing with scheduling and things like that. But she seems fully aware of what the financials are. Um, but Yuna is interesting because she's also kind of pushing.
Sort of diplomatic. No, Jiwoo's not diplomatic about sort of
No.
like he recognizes Jiwoo's contribution and value, but he also doesn't want to go directly against his boss. So they're playing, they're more diplomatic about how they handle the workplace situation.
Yeah. And
And
Yuna's advice to Jiwoo is, her mother kind of has this middle ground, right? Like, well, if you don't like it, then you go hunt. Don't
yeah,
let him have the last word. Make sure you're in control, but let him ask you out. And Yuna is very much like, well, use your eyes, seduce him, and be more flirtatious and everything like that. So they have
yeah,
sort of interesting work friendship, which we don't see
yeah,
outside of work.
yeah. So it's a soft power versus hard power kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then there's like Han, who is the intern who got promoted to full time, or the part timer who got promoted to full time. And like there's sort of a mini arc where he Jiwoo becomes his mentor, and Jiwoo actually gets a little jealous about this,
Mm.
because like he's, she's spending more time with him at the office. And that apparently there's and at one point Ji Han actually tells Ji Hoo that I appreciate her directness and her bluntness. And so and it's like he's a little subby himself.
Yeah.
And at one point he's Ji Woo is sitting between Ji Hoo, who is like nervously clicking his pen,
Yeah.
and Han, who is jerking his leg. And it's like Ji Woo just says, both of you stop it.
Yes.
And they both stop at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
The two men have that conversation in the men's restroom
yeah,
where he's
yeah,
like, Ji Hoo is like, it's tough. So you can ask me questions, which is kind of like, stop going to her all the time with the questions. Because it is distracting. Before that, he would, he'd bring coffee and she'd smile at him. They would have these little looks at each other. But she is so
yeah,
busy at that moment, which Yuna mentioned, she's going to be really busy this coming month. And
yeah,
she's got to mentor this new guy who is a part of the kink community online, because we see him
yeah.
on the forums.
We don't know that later until the very end. But yeah,
Yeah.
he's the guy in the rabbit mask.
Yes. Yes. And who's been giving them advice. And I always,
Yeah,
and I've wondered, like, how much did he figure out about their relationship? Because some
I
of
don't
the
know.
things he says to Ji Hoo in the men's restroom, like, it seems really odd that you would comment like, oh yeah, she's really straightforward and aggressive, but I like it. It's kind of sexy. And he's like,
Oh
what?
yeah.
Like, what? Like, what did you just say? It's like, you were right there when he told the manager that that's sexual harassment, some of the things he was saying. And now you actually think you're going to say that to him? It's like,
Yeah.
he's
That
like,
was
I
another
felt almost like
problem.
he's pushing his buttons on purpose.
Yeah. Now that actually ties into another element I was considering, because they meet at work. He is her superior in the office hierarchy, even though she's probably has seniority, at least in this group. Um, he's and so there is like that's one of the things she's reluctant to do, because of feeling that it is like mixing a personal relationship with a work relationship. And like there's that scene where they meet late at night after everybody's gone home, and they go into this humiliation. She starts doing this humiliation thing, like he okay, first of all, he tries to take the blame for a mistake Han made. So she'll chastise him or something. And then she like turns that into this impromptu humiliation scene, and she's just like dragging him all through the office, like yelling at him, like calling all kinds of names. But she's you can tell it's not just like
We'll get to that scene in detail, but yeah. Well, we have one more minor character to talk about till we start
yeah,
digging into the movie, and that's the PR manager,
yeah,
Wang, and
Wang.
he's a work and a half.
Okay. Well, he's just your typical sexist middle management guy, and he's got this thing with his back scratcher, like it's his scepter of power or something, and
I know.
he's always like he'll even like pick up papers with it and gesture at people with it. So
yeah, and he is like just flat out sexist. And it's one of the, I think it's where Ji Hoo makes the most important impact in Ji Woo's mind. I think she found him attractive just physically before, but it isn't until that first meeting and Wang is just saying sexist stuff left and right. Specifically, he says, it's hard to have these conversations because we have women in the group. And Ji Hoo's like, wow, PR is so much different than the business team. It's like,
Yeah.
we would not do this stuff in the business team because that's he flat says that could be construed as sexual harassment. He's like, oh, well, yeah, you got it. I was testing you. Your gender
Yeah.
sensitivity is really good.
Yeah. He knows how to soft pedal it.
And I don't know if you picked it up, but when this manager at one point says, like, you have to be more polite and you have to smile when you make these suggestions that waste our time, which is what Ji-Hoo has done. He goes, being cute isn't just for your boyfriends. And someone who isn't one of the main characters, we hear her whisper, he's doing, basically he's doing it again. And so and you kind of look around then and you see all the women are kind of glaring at him like, are you kidding me? Yeah. And this is, getting back to Yuna, she warns Ji-Woo about standing up more for herself and speaking out more. She's like, the more you do that, the more he's going to try to take you down.
Yeah.
And so Ji-Woo kind of becomes like their knight and is like, don't do this. And he does that multiple times in the movie. He'll say things like, no, we need to deal with this. We can't let this go. And to the point, there's a claim that they've used copyrighted material, and he calls out the manager in front of everyone and says to Ji-Woo, do you have those copies? Get those copies, to the intern, get the conference room. We're going to deal this with right now. And he walks off and the manager's just like, I feel like I've been threatened. And I'm like, yeah, because you're not being a good manager. It's like your assistant manager is going to take over if you don't clean up your act.
So is it like he's because of the company politics, he's been put in a position of authority. So like, and I guess he's trying to do it properly. And, he realizes that probably in a more meritocratic world, Ji-Woo would be running this. But I guess it's like he's trying to do the right thing for his position in the group.
Yeah. We've mentioned before kind of the plot convenience of how they meet cute.
Yeah.
And this sort of thing. Do you want to talk about any of that anymore? Do you think we've covered it?
Not really. I don't think there, it's a meet cute, you just need some reason to get them together. So one of the things another thing I want to talk about, and this ties into when I was talking about how Ji-Woo was dressing, is that, there's a lot of talk in films and media studies about the male gaze. And so one of the things I've noticed about this is that there's a lot of shots of her from her or her POV looking at Ji-Hoo. And Ji-Hoo is this young, quite handsome man. And there's a number of shots of her just looking at him, sort of drinking him, like admiring him physically, and often in very vulnerable positions. Like their first scene per se is when they go into the break, I think it's the lounge or something. And she tells them to put on a blindfold and just sit in a chair. And there's a whole thing of her looking at him, and we get close-ups of like his face and his chest and stuff like that. And they talk a bit as well. So it is very much and we don't get the same kind of the actress playing, Ji-Woo is quite attractive too, but we don't get glamour shots of her in the same way most of the time. Like we do see her in, she is in, like in beautiful dresses and things like that. But we never see her nude. We never see her topless. Like, in fact, I think we see like Ji-Hoo with his shirt off more and in sort of these vulnerable positions. And that's presented as beautiful, as like aesthetic. So I think that's a big difference because, there is this reluctance to, look at the male body in a sensual way, especially for women to look at the male body in a sensual way, and especially in a way that does not involve like, men displaying strength or courage, like in war or something like that. But the idea is like shots of him, there's a bigger emphasis on his beauty, his physical, and her looking at him. And I think that's I think that communicates with the female viewer of being like, you can have this position of looking and of as a dominance thing, as a power thing.
Yeah, and it's also how we know that she's interested in him.
Yes.
Because some of the other women in the building clearly aren't interested in him, and
Mm.
they'll manufacture things like, oh, the copier doesn't work, and she's like literally like glaring. Well, she's not glaring at him, she's glaring at them. And she's probably
Yeah.
also going, I don't understand this. It is so
Yeah.
outside of what she would be comfortable doing that I think it's hard for her to understand what they're doing. It would not be how she would flirt. It would not be how she would
No.
interact with the man. And so she's kind of confused and like, why is he, reacting the way he is, which isn't exactly, he's like, well, I didn't do anything and, I'm here to help you, because he really likes to help women. I've noticed that, we mentioned like he talks up, but also, he's like, yeah, we're going to go help your friend who's called on the phone. And that's more important than getting these handcuffs on. It's just like, boom, a woman needs help. I'm there. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
But also
Yeah.
like, so I wanted to mention, so I watched this movie far too many times. So I watched it twice in the Korean with subtitles. And then I watched it in the dubbed in English, but then I watched it again, turning on the subtitles with the English. And I would urge anyone watching this who hasn't seen it yet, turn on your subtitles, because there are 3 scenes where stuff is going on in the background that you may not be able to hear with just your ears. So I'd like to just talk about those real quick, because it also has to do with this turning the gaze on the male and having the viewpoint being the female. Early on, they're kind of sitting in the cafeteria of their building. And of course, they have like what's showing is their cable channel. I think maybe they must have a children's network or something that they work for based on
I think that's right.
And in the background, there's the characters up there, and she's with her friend Yuna, and they're at one table, and she's looking at him. He's not even facing her. And they're talking in the background. You can kind of hear it, but you only get the full dialogue if you read it. The kids show, they're like, oh, there's a pervert at school? Mm. Oh no, we have to catch the pervert. Let's go catch the pervert and protect everybody from the pervert. They say the word pervert 4 times. And each time he just jumps or shakes or spills stuff and she just kind of watches him like, huh, he's having this strange reaction. And it's a very intense reaction that he has, because he's so primed to think someone's going to think he's a pervert. Someone's going to know what he's doing, and he's going to lose his job. His entire life's going to be ruined. But she's just watching him and wondering, why is he reacting this way? I actually found that scene, I think it's supposed to make us laugh, but I found it kind of sad.
Yeah. Yeah. This is also where I want to get into. Wish that we could have I was actually asking around if anybody I knew Korean, because I think there's maybe some nuances in the language that is translated as in the English translation that were missing through the English translation. Like for example, pervert is that, what is that is in Korean? Is it? There's also the question of titles, for example. Like he in the English subtitles, he refers to her as master. Mm-hmm. But I don't think he ever uses the term. Well, in the subtitle, I don't think he ever uses the term mistress. And if I remember correctly, he wants to call her master, but she wants her to just use her first name.
Yeah.
So, which I believe is a sort of a more intimate thing in Asian cultures. Okay, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong. So, and it's also but again, there's questions of what is that term that they translated to master in Korean? Is there a comparable term like mistress in Korean? For example, like he writes on her coffee. When he gets her coffee, he writes for my mistress or my mistress, something like that, but it's in English.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing nobody in the office can read English, but like that doesn't seem to carry over into the dialogue. So I
Yeah.
cannot feel like there's a lot of nuances here that we're not getting. Like at one point, I believe Han almost even again in the translation, he refers to Jihu as like Lord Jihu or something. And I'm like, he is the superior, but he's using like a super honorific, a very high honorific to address him. And how does he? So again, I wish somebody this is probably there's probably a ton of nuances we're missing out here.
Yeah. Yeah. Another place where listening to what's going on in the background works is relates to their boss Wong. And so
Yeah,
they have this event, this sort of like festival to celebrate all their kids' shows and generate interest. And of course, the manager can't even be bothered to show up and do the work until they have the celebratory meal. They seem to have a
yeah,
lot of meals together, I noticed, for work. And Jiwoo is like the last one in. I get this feeling that she does this a lot. You know, she's like the first one in to go to the work and the last one to put stuff away because she kind of wants it done right. And they kind of
yeah,
everyone expects her to do it. And so when she comes in, they're at different tables and Wong is at one with Jihu and Yuna, and he moves to another table next to them. And he's left a mess there. So first of all, she's annoyed because there's a mess where there's a seat for her. And we keep seeing her glancing towards Wong, and you can hear some of the conversation, but when you can read it, I mean, he's just immediately making sexist comments. Like the intern isn't cooking right. Men should know how to grill better. Women should
yeah,
know how to grill. They should know how to cut fruit, you know, and
yeah,
all this. And we see, you know, she's having a conversation, and Yuna's trying to engage her because Yuna's trying to set up her and Jihu as a
yeah,
couple.
yeah,
And she's like, well, what do we know about Jihu? Is he have, you know, what are his flaws? She's like, I don't know. And she like literally like covers her mouth, like she's giggling. It's like the most stereotypical feminine thing we've seen her do. She's like, I don't know, we're not that close. And then she glances and we can hear this, you know, like, oh, women have to do this, women have to do that. She's like, it's disgusting.
mm,
And of course, Jihu immediately like drink, you know, because he thinks it's directed at him. Because I guess he's not close enough and he can't hear what the manager's doing. And he doesn't yet understand Jiwoo. So he doesn't understand that she's not talking about him at all anymore. This is clearly directed towards the boss.
yeah,
And so then she comes out and everyone's left. And of course, Yuna's like, have fun with Jihu. You know, I'm just like, wow, just matchmaker, make that match, you know.
mm,
And she finds him and he's, I think, probably drunk because he stumbles later and he's just crying in a
yeah.
kind of weird way.
Well, she says it sounds like a dog whimpering,
Yeah.
which is one of many times he's compared to a dog.
Yeah. And she finds him and is like, you know, what's going on? And reveals, you know, that he thinks she's made these comments about him and she catches on really quick. He reveals he's been dumped by his ex and she'd use the same words, disgusting. And of course, when G was like understanding, like, well, you know, I don't think you're pervert, or maybe you are, but we're all a little perverted, aren't we? And this is him jumping to assumptions and kind of
Yeah,
going too fast for her, because he means like, you know, would you be my master? And I really like that she's like, no,
mm,
you know, no, because she doesn't know what that is yet. And we see
yeah,
time and time again, if she doesn't think she knows what something is, she's not going to go forward with it. She's going to take her time and plan. So I think if you don't know that stuff's going on in the background, you might misunderstand what she said, just like he does. And then the
yeah.
final place, yeah, the final place where I think it's really important that you understand the conversations going on around them is they go to an arboretum, and we'll talk about this more in detail. But while they're having their lunch and things are being revealed about them, other people around them are making comments, and they're not
Yeah.
negative. They're
Yeah.
all very much like, oh, I could do that to you. We should try that. We should do that.
Yeah.
And that to me was actually a breath of fresh air, because I felt like if this was an American movie, it'd been like, oh, well, look at those sickos, or, or just laughter or
Well,
pointing. And
yeah. I sort of felt a little different about that moment because like they're sitting in the cafe, they're handcuffed together, and they one of them spills a drink. Which one? Like,
she does.
because they
She
kind of
hits
both.
her head on the table
Yeah.
and it spills the drink. And
Yeah. So the staff come over to clean up, and they see that they're handcuffed together, and they're both the staff people are a little dismayed by this, and they don't know what to do.
yeah,
So like, yeah, I don't know, I felt the maybe I interpreted the comments of the other people in the room a bit more negatively, that they were almost joking, like laughing about it, not in maybe in a harsher way, but yeah, they're put a lot of thought into, the people who directed that made this film put a lot of thought into like the culture of it, the people around, the sort of the background elements of sexism and responses.
yeah. All right,
Yeah.
so let's talk about the setup for their kink relationship.
Yeah.
So she thinks about it. We talked a bit about, they have this meeting in a lounge. She gives him a
Yep.
blindfold, and I think it's her attempting to scene, but she doesn't quite understand the dynamics yet because they're not in a relationship with. And I like that he actually takes the blindfold off and basically
Okay.
says, you're really cool. And she's like, why'd you take it off? He's like, well, you're not my master yet.
Okay. So I felt that like he was being a little bratty there. But I guess under sort of the strict rules, I guess you're right. I haven't agreed to anything yet. I don't have to. I haven't accepted you as an authority yet. So, yeah.
Because then
So
he
yeah,
follows it up by offering her to hold an umbrella for her.
Yeah.
Because I got the impression that maybe he realized, oh, what if she didn't like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think yeah. I think that was like him making up for it, like,
Yeah.
but also showing that he's willing to be, sort of supportive and protective of her.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
she
and it's
goes, talk about going to extremes. I think it's like the very next morning, she just like sends him a
yeah,
text or something like, come here. And she's got a contract. And I'm just
yeah,
like, whoa, you went from I'll do this with you and I'll look into it to now we're going to sign a contract.
yeah. That was. I'm trying not to get hung up on realism in these
Yeah.
things. I'm kind of more not in the literal realism. I'm more interested in sort of what you might call the emotional realism.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there probably should have been a conversation. Ideally, there should have been at least one conversation before we start whipping out contracts and signing stuff and all that, because like, he doesn't know really anything about her. He doesn't know how experienced she is, doesn't know if she has any experience whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but they go straight into that. They're up on the roof garden, and she even says like that was where like I think there was a problem, because she says like, sex is included. Her contract says sex is included, and she sort of like says, oh, I just printed one offline, and like he seems to be like, there seems to be some sort of disagreement in this film about whether sex should be or can be a part of an SM relationship. And I know there's some people for whom it's not, those are separate realms, and for other people they overlap, and that can change over time. So I kind of wish they'd handled that a bit better. like maybe just sort of rewrite it slightly so he would say that, you know, sex is not on the table, sex is not on the list. But
Yeah. Yeah, but on the other hand, we talked about how long we've been doing this and how we met
yeah,
online. Do you remember the infamous, was it 1,001 rules for slaves or something like that bullshit that was out there?
yeah, people love
There,
that kind of stuff.
yeah, there are people out there who literally print out other people's contracts, whether they're based on real life or pure fantasy, and they
Yeah,
literally just expect each other to sign these things. So in that sense, she it felt like those rookie people who are so excited
yeah,
by the prospect that they don't think through how they should do it.
yeah, good point.
But yeah, and you mentioned that she doesn't, he wants to call her master, and he does, by the way, several times call her master in the movie.
Yeah,
Even though she says, no, don't do that. And he kind of wants to offer, he's trying to negotiate, like, well, what if I call you Lady Jiwoo? And she's like, no, Jiwoo. Which, yeah, you're completely right. She keeps calling him Mr. Yan or Yang repeatedly in the
Jung, I
movie.
believe, Jun, the Jung, Jung. So I think,
June, Mr. June, and
yeah,
repeatedly, even after
yeah,
they're, in a relationship, just not when they're scening. Um,
yeah,
and so I don't know if that's because she's quote unquote old fashioned, like the cafe owner friend claims that she is.
yeah,
But she wants, I guess, that maybe it makes her feel more herself to have her name used
yeah,
versus, because she is, you remember, she's hung up on, like, you said you wanted someone like me to be your master. What did you mean by that? So I think that's the counter. And I have felt this as a female dominant before, of, are you wanted for you, or are you wanted for the stereotype of what a female dominant is?
yes.
Or in this case, does he want her, or does he just want
Yeah,
somebody?
he is so eager. And like, I get the impression like he tried to introduce SM to his relationship with Hana. She smacked him down hard,
Mm-hmm.
and he's never been able to do that with anybody in person since. And he may have never met another person who's even into SM, much less much less a female dominant. So that's how desperate he is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so he's desperate. She's not really sure what she's doing, which is not a good recipe for safe, sane, and consensual, or even risk-aware kink.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
She claims that she's going to punish his disobedience, and that's when we hear a voiceover of what she's learned from this online sort of mentor called FemFem, whom
mm-hmm.
I think we both agree may be Lee Han, really.
Yeah.
And
Well, Leon's definitely the rabbit guy, the rabbit mask person. We don't know if Fem is the same person. So
yeah, that's what comes up next to FemFem's name, is that icon.
the
So
rabbit symbol.
yeah, is the
Oh,
person
okay.
in the mask. Yeah. But do we actually see her ever punishing him for
Um,
slip ups? Because, like I said, he calls her master several more times, and
yeah,
she
I
doesn't
don't think
enforce
she
that.
does. I
Yeah,
don't. Yeah. Well, she may be like, I don't know. You could split hairs that he's using it to refer to her role rather than addressing her. Maybe. Um,
yeah. And then she gives him the glasses.
yes.
So she's read somewhere that carrying a token makes you feel owned. So she gives him glasses, which are innocuous. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of people now apparently wear them as fashion statements. I still don't like them. I will wear contacts that are so thick before I wear glasses, just because I just don't like the pressure it puts on me. But he, and her rule is for the glasses is put them on when you want me to, boss you around in the office, when you want my order, my command in the office. And he just puts them on. And
Yeah.
they're
He's wearing
only
them
a,
all the time.
yeah.
I don't
And
think
I'm,
I don't, do we ever when we almost always see him wearing them in the
yeah,
office. I
there are
don't
only
think.
two times, and they both relate to when there is a more intense miscommunication
Mm.
between them in a scene, like the night before, the weekend before. And there are times he'll like lift them up, like draw her attention to them. And for me
Yeah.
personally, I was like, that is not what she meant. She didn't
Yeah.
mean
There's moments.
weirdlies.
Yeah. There's moments when I like they tease, like it looks like he's going to take them off and like speak to her out of role, but he's just adjusting them. So,
Yeah, but
uh,
when they seen, he's not wearing them.
yeah. So maybe that's just that rule only applies in the office.
Yeah. So yeah, so their relationship according to their contract, and you mentioned the sex thing that's in the contract, and he seems surprised by it being the
Mm.
contract. And I noticed this today when I rewatched it before we got together to talk. Um, he's very much like, oh, no, 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 I understand you don't want me touching you. I don't have any of those ideas about you. And she gets a pout on her face. She's like, really? Because I will tell you, fair or not, I will tell you as someone who was raised to be a woman that even if you don't want someone to see you as a sexual object, it does
Mm.
hurt to be told, oh, I don't see you as a sexual object. It's kind of like you don't want someone to only judge you by what you look like, but it's nice when someone says, I really like that, you look sexy. It's this
Yeah.
catch 22.
Yeah. And yeah, so it's yeah, this is a very awkward part of it because like she later on in the contract, this 3-month contract, which is supposed to have, what was it, 12 scenes,
Yeah.
one per week. Um, inter- um, as an aside, most of these seem to be done in hotel rooms, like
Mm-hmm.
even like SM specialty hotel rooms, which I guess is a thing in Korea. She wants, to have wants sexual elements, and he just seems content to have it be, more just, I guess I mean, you get in gray areas, like, I think it's like he like kisses, there's bits where he's like kissing her feet and things like that. And that can be, some people find that quite sexual. So, um, yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity in there that I wish had been tightened up in the storytelling.
I have heard
Yeah.
from people who have talked about who've seen the entire web comic, who've read
Yeah.
it in Korean, that reflects kind of the really how that's laid out. Um, and
in in Korea or in
in
the
in
Korean
the in
scene.
well, no, in the web comic that this movie is based on, that
Yeah.
how it's laid out and how the order that they're doing stuff and kind of this, are they going to have sex? Are they not going to have sex? Is it okay to have sex? It is
Yeah.
really reflected. And they sped things up in the movie because I guess it's a pretty
Yeah.
long web comic.
Yeah. I mean, it's already
Um,
over 2 hours. So
yeah.
yeah, there is like that bit where, like, okay, in the bit with Jaime, um, and her bad experience, like she talks about fake doms who only want to have sex, and Ji Woo takes that, uh, misinterprets that a bit,
Hmm.
and she feels bad about her, like she feels ashamed for wanting to like include sexual contact in their scenes, and that's sort of that's a stress point for her.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's get into the fun part of the movie, which is the
Yeah.
scenes. I think there are possibly 9 scenes, depending on how you count them. So we don't see
Mhm.
all 12. And some
Yeah.
we see in greater detail than others. Some are like interspersed with what's going on at work and other things. I liked how it interspersed. So you kind of see like what's happening at work, how is that being played out, or the counter in the scene, but we can talk about that. So their
Yeah.
first scene after they have their contract is this puppy play scene.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And he goes overboard with his barking,
I
so
know.
much so that people think they have an actual dog there in the hotel. Yeah. And they have, I think it's only like in the very last scene that they do it at his place. So it's like they're doing all of this in this neutral space that isn't
Mhm.
like his place or his home or her home. Um, and they're so he like, yeah, they even get noise complaints, which that again, that's a little like that where things go a little bit wrong, and she feels like, oh my god, I get the impression she's one of those perfectionist types who want to do everything exactly right. And
Oh, yeah, and we
um,
hear Femfem's voice over like saying like,
yeah,
like in the contract, like the Dom is always going to be perfect.
yeah, that
And I'm
was
like,
I
really?
also, yeah, that's not helpful advice in my opinion. I think you agree. Um, so that didn't go quite as well as they'd hoped, but I think they had to leave then because the management was complaining. Uh, then the second one was
Well, let's talk more about the puppy place. Let's dig into
okay.
it a little bit.
Yeah,
So you mentioned, how there's this stress of should they have sex and who wants to have the sex. I think when you look at the puppy play scene, at one point she has like it's probably a kid's snack, so it kind of looks like puppy
yeah,
chow, and she's like, "Here,
yeah,
have it," and he goes like full throttle into that hand, like licking and nuzzling, and she gets this look on her face. She's like, like oh yeah. Okay, if you've ever had someone eat from your hand or lick your hand or nuzzle your hand, yeah, that goes to certain body parts, and yeah, and I think it's turning her on. I think we see right there in the first scene that she is having a reaction, and normally she's very stoic. We
mm,
don't see her smile all that often. Her eyes are very serious a lot of times, and she's really like, whoa, like, oh yeah, like she is liking that. That is
yeah,
something she likes. But I had a thought. He just starts barking like crazy because they hear people, I believe, having sex
yeah.
next door. And he goes nuts. Do you think that's foreshadowing his jealousy issues later on?
Um, I interpreted that at him as that him just over method acting a dog, and that like almost like expecting her to push back harder and be more of a disciplinarian with him. And so he just, she isn't at this point, she isn't like assertive enough to say no, 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 and like you would with a real dog.
Mm-hmm.
And um, so I see that as that's the problem there. Um, even though it doesn't end well, she definitely enjoys the moment of him eating out of her hand,
Yeah.
and yeah,
I think this has the funniest bit of dialogue in the movie for me, at least. Each time I watched
yeah.
this movie, I kept laughing. They're like, how, the funniest line is, "How dare a dog talk back to a human?" Basically, it's like, oh
Yeah,
my goodness, it's just ridiculous. So then we have the birthday party
yeah,
scene, and this is where he gives her the shoes that you brought up before.
yes, yeah,
Um, and I think this is another example of she takes things almost oddly serious. Like he's clearly doing this to try to be like romantic and kind of give her an early birthday surprise, and she's just like, nope, not having it. Just like blow that candle out. Just like
yeah. She's not. Yeah, yeah. But it's like that's another thing because that gets into I get the impression she's not like she doesn't date. She's not used to. She's not the playful type. She's
mhm.
very businesslike, and it's so when he starts singing the birthday song, she just blows the candle out before it even starts. Uh, and that's when he gives her the heels. And again, that was, I mean, like we can tell that I think she enjoys them, but it's also like, that's, a big part of, I think it's a big gamble he took that she would like them.
Mhm.
Like, because, you know, he's probably seen her and she's probably wearing more business like shoes um, up until now. And, you know, as we pointed out earlier, you know, not every female dom, you know, likes the stereotypical high heeled shoe look. But she does, apparently, and she both as a fashion thing and as a tool for dominance, because she uses that to press the heel into his chest and back,
Pretty
and that,
severely.
yeah, she has marks. And um yeah, and I think that later on, even in the office, you see her starting to wear high heeled shoes, like
Yeah.
in the infamous humiliation scene. She's actually wearing like almost like stereotypical sexy secretary wear. She's wearing like the white blouse, but she's also wearing a relatively short skirt, like knee length, and the
Hmm.
high heels. So that's a lot sort of sexier business attire than we usually see her in. And usually she's just in like sort of casual slacks. Um, but yeah, she apparently his gamble paid off and she likes those shoes.
Yeah, and this shows us a lot of that, the female gaze on the male body that you were talking about too,
Mhm. Yeah.
because we could be really focused on her in those shoes. And instead, we're really focused on him bowing down, which I
Yeah.
also looked at and kept going like, well, I'm glad I see her hand on the chair stabilizing herself, because that doesn't look like a very stable position for her to be in. I mean, if he were flat on the ground, that'd be a lot easier for her to step on him. But you know, he's literally
Yeah.
bowing. You know, his knees are up underneath his body and he's stretching out. And you can see like they zoom in on his face, on his
Yep.
fingers, you know, as he's stretching. Um, I felt like the actor did a really good job of showing what it might feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's very, yeah, the actor is very good at being expressive about in these experiences. And I think that goes into the female gaze thing,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like we're in her perspective, seeing his reactions and appreciating it.
Yeah. And I don't know that I would immediately have gone from a puppy scene to something that leaves such severe marks on his body.
Mm.
That felt like a big jump. But I feel like
Yeah.
the scenes might be like whatever she's looked at that week, researched that
Yeah.
week.
Yeah. The like, I'm not sure he has a lot of actual real world experience either. I mean, he might have read more
Mm-hmm.
or looked at more websites and things, but you know, I don't think I get the impression he actually has not done a lot other than like with Hana. um so yeah, maybe, you know, there are like some things you might think are fun to do, but the reality is not the same, or that uh that doing something that actually leaves marks might be a problem.
Yeah. And
That's
yeah, we watch her after they have the scene. We have a very short glimpse of him looking at the marks on his back and his chest, but a lot of
Yeah.
it is her at home trying the shoes on again, and
Yeah.
also with just her feet, like pressing them against her bed, and we see her reacting to thinking about what she's done. And she
Yeah,
does
she
that
has.
several times.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely, we see her afterwards. Like, I think we see her like she's looking at herself, her reflection of herself in the high heeled shoes. And like, you know, you see her sort of like in the sort of sexy mood, and she's pressing her feet against the wall, her bare feet against the wall. So she seems to be like reliving it and reevaluating it to see, okay, that's going in the yes column.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And then they start having this back and forth scenes with stuff going on in the office where
yeah.
Jihu's getting jealous because she's mentoring this guy she doesn't want to mentor. And they have this great hot wax scene, which I felt was just beautiful to look at. I thought it was shot beautifully.
Yeah, they set up all the candles. There's the bathtub. I guess this is another hotel room.
Mhm.
and like he's like resting in the bathtub, and she's dripping the candle wax, dripping the candle wax on him. And like we actually see her like going to what I'm assuming is the same adult store,
Mhm.
like picking out a candle for this. So it's definitely him. Yeah. So it's like we're seeing her. We're definitely seeing her as an agent,
Mhm.
as like she's selecting the tools, she's making decisions about the scene. She's very much like, I am a willing and active participant in this, and these are the things I want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and I just, she's like in a dress and it's just like looks like a nice dress. It's airy, it's light, but she's doing something that's painful to him. And and I keep getting these glimpses, and maybe it's me reading into it. And not only does she enjoy it in general, but I think
Mm,
she actually enjoys inflicting pain. Because
mm,
like as soon as he starts to relax into the hot wax drip, boom, she increases the frequency. Like suddenly they're coming faster and he's got to adjust again. And I think, like when we see her after the scene's processing, I think it's pretty clear she's not doing this for him. She's
yeah,
doing it
she
because she enjoys it.
yeah, and I think they even imply that she's masturbating after one of these scenes. Strongly imply that she's masturbating. So
Yes, I agree. I agree. So then they have you mentioned the bondage feather scene.
yeah,
Um, I don't really understand the bondage over the clothes thing, but
yeah,
I guess it's to show off the color
yeah.
of the
I
rope
I don't know. And it's like
straps.
you're also not going to do much with a feather tickler if a person's clothed. So yeah,
But I wondered if maybe that also, we have the feather tickler thing and the next scene where she's just stepping on him with her bare feet while he's on a
yeah,
bed. Those are, compared to the scenes that came before, they're lighter. You know,
yeah. Maybe she's yeah. I mean, if in terms of like degree of force and the likelihood of injury, it's kind of, it's not escalating. If anything, it's de-escalating. That she's that maybe they could have juggled those scenes around and like started off with something relatively soft and unlikely to cause injury, and then gone up to the high heel marks in his back. Um, that 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 that's again, well, another rewrite we would suggest.
well, I actually, thinking back at it, it's interspersed with these. She's mentoring someone while she has a heavy workload. I'm wondering if she's doing lighter scenes because she's feeling so much stress in the office. Like,
Maybe that's possible.
it's maybe she just didn't have time to go get more things, so I'm just gonna squish your face with my bare foot.
Yeah.
um
Well, I mean, like we saw her, I think after the heels scene, we saw her like pressing her feet into the wall.
yeah,
So maybe that's where she realized, okay, feet, yeah, feet have possibilities here.
yeah,
So
and
she
it's
may
more
have
skin
like,
to skin contact, which would
yeah,
satisfy her increasing desires to be more physically, sexually
yeah,
intimate. And then they have the strange, I don't know if we want to call this a scene or not, when they're in the office and his jealousy
yeah,
kind of come to a head. um
yeah,
I mean,
yeah. That was,
I watched this with
yeah,
my slave. So I've had the same slave now for 22 years, and he watched the movie with me the second time I watched it because I was like
yeah,
gushing about it. So he's like, I'm going to watch it with you. And normally when we watch things together, he'll be on his computer or I'll be on mine because I'm not always into the things that he likes. He's not always into things I'm like. He put his computer away and just sat there and watched it with me. So that's how much he
mm,
liked this movie. But when they go in, when he calls, so when Jihu calls Jiwoo back to the office at the end of the day, and we see what he's trying to do, we both just looked at each other and we're like, this is not smart. This is a bad idea, which comes back to bite them.
Yeah, I think this is where, he's motivated by jealousy. She lets her frustrations, her real work frustrations spill over into the scene. And I think that's volatile. Like he's enjoying the humiliation stuff, all the verbal humiliation and things, but I I think like she's genuinely angry, like genuinely, like, she drags him over to where Huang, the manager, sits, and like she stands on his desk, and she like picks up his back scratcher, his symbolic back scratcher, and snaps it over her leg, his tool, his symbol of power. And it's like, what the, okay, I think she's like projecting some of her feelings about Huang onto Jihu, and I think that's a bad idea. This is where I think I think humiliation play is something you need to do with a lot of care, and not something to get your personal, something you got to be careful. Like, as I said before, don't play angry.
Yeah. And I think in the beginning, she's just like, okay, he's jealous. He really wants to be hurt. She's like, it's translated different whether you're watching it in Korean with English subs or you're watching it dubbed. The words they use are different for some of the insults that she has. But at first, she's just like looking around. What thing can I complain about? Oh, well, you can't fix the coffee maker. Of course, we've never seen him try to fix the coffee maker. But once they move out in the office, everything she complains about, we've seen already in the movie, like that copier and those women flirting with him. Her complaint about be nicer, smile more, be cuter. The intern who is constantly asking her the same damn things again, and the manager. And so she's just like targeting each of these frustrations, which society and her friend at work are saying, you have to control yourself. You can't speak out about it. And she speaks out there. And when they run and they're in the car, she even says, like, I liked it too. I got really excited. So she loses control.
Yeah, she's venting a lot of pent up stuff.
And that can be tempting. It's one of my own personal limits I have, is I don't play when I'm upset or angry. But I will tell you that I have had partners literally come to me and say, I can tell you're upset, hit me. And I have said to them repeatedly, no, if you want to help me, sit down and listen to me talk or cry or something like that. But I am not going to hit you, because I have this worry that once I start, I may not be in control anymore. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing there. But it's also just a dumb idea to do stuff like that at your workplace. Even though I will remind us all that she's the one who gives him the glasses and says, when you want my orders, wear the glasses at work. And so there's mixed messages there, I think. Yeah. Then they have daily reports, which I don't know if that's supposed to be a scene or whatever. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about daily reports. I know we did it when we had an online relationship, but we had an online relationship. I mean, we had to find a way to...
We were living on opposite sides of the continent.
Yeah. But having had a relationship with a person who lived in the same city as me, we did that at one point because they wanted to do that. And I just found it not worth it. But,
like, I mean, they do, like in Secretary, they do almost exactly the same thing, where she like reports her diet to him, and he micromanages her diet. So it may work. It works for them.
Yeah. So that's like another thing they have going on, which I guess is perhaps an escalation of their relationship, because they're spending more and more time on it. And then we have the flogging scene,
Yeah.
which I think is
In the
an
red room.
yeah, that's like very, I think, beautifully shot. The
Oh
way
yeah.
the camera angles and turns.
Yeah, they must have been doing some fancy CG and stuff, because like there's they're using, it's like the room's full of mirrors, and they're doing angles at which the camera crew would be visible. So I'm assuming they're doing some fancy green screen and stuff. So like there's even a scene where like the camera literally moves through the mirror somehow, and we see Ji Hoo pressed up against the mirror, but from within the mirror, if I'm making myself clear. So that was, yeah, that was really good. That was also the only one where she's wearing like a fetishy type dress.
Yeah.
And um, so yeah, that was really, that was a good one. And um, now this is also when like she's like there's visible, definitely cuts on his back, and she's like, you know, treating it with, I don't know, antiseptic or something. So, and they're talking, but also like he sort of like, you know, when she's done with that, he sort of bounces up and like, you know, I'm gonna go and get ready to, and I think it's like she wanted some more, you know, aftercare is a two-way street.
Mm.
And I think like she wanted, that's like her, she was wanting some physical intimacy, even just cuddling
Yeah.
after
She's,
that.
he's
And
also, yeah. Yeah.
like he's there in the scene, but he's not there, he's kind of a little more distant the rest of the time.
Yeah. And this is where, he's already told her about Hana.
Yeah.
Hana texts him or calls him or something. He checks the phone, but he doesn't pick up. She notices and says, like, what's going on? Are you still in touch? He's like, well, she hates me, blah, blah, blah. And she's like cleaning him, and he doesn't want to talk about it. So she purposely pushes one of the wounds to get him to talk. So she's using pain to probably force him to talk. And he explains that yes, the stuff hurts, but it makes him feel alive. It makes him feel good. And she's like, I don't understand. And he immediately makes an assumption like, oh, okay, well, she's like rejecting me again. But then she immediately says, if you like someone and this sort of stuff makes them feel alive, makes them feel good, why would you not do it for them? Because what we're doing
Yeah.
isn't wrong. It isn't bad. And so then he like immediately says, oh, that's why I'm so glad I have you. And you seem to be enjoying it more. And that's when he bounces up, because I think she's offering that deeper level of intimacy, emotional and intellectual symbiosis with him. She's saying like,
Yeah.
this doesn't make any sense to me. Your girlfriend would treat you this way. But she's also flat out said to him, I like you
Mm.
because you've told me this. What we're doing isn't wrong. And so when he leaves to go shower and stuff, she's just like sitting there, like, this is clearly
Yeah.
not where she wanted something more back from him, but I think he's too afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's almost like he's afraid that she's doing this out of some sense of obligation, not
Yeah.
because she's enjoying it for its own sake.
Yeah.
It's not mutual enjoyment, and I think that's bothering him. That's an anxiety for him too. So um, maybe maybe he feels like, oh, we can be physically intimate, but I'm not going to be emotionally. I'm not going to ask you for anything emotional.
Yeah.
And she doesn't mind. She's not averse to being emotionally intimate. So
Yeah.
there's a friction there.
Yeah. And I think it costs her to admit that she wants this emotional intimacy. And I think that also plays right into the next scene at the Arboretum.
Yeah.
I think she purposely mentioned this. She cuffs them together. I believe, she's cuffing them together. So the way they're sitting, she would cuff her left wrist to his right wrist. So she's probably taking away his dominant hand.
Yeah.
And, she hasn't thought it all out. But at the same time, she set it up so that she has to feed him. He
Yeah.
has to rely on her more.
Good point. And it's also like, I think it's like, this is like a traditional date thing that they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're doing it so that they're walking side by side. They have to walk side by side. And she even tells him, he's sitting like across the table from her in the cafe, but she says, no, come over here and sit next to me.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like she's kind of like tricking him into doing more traditional date things, but excusing it, but calling it's like she's tricking him into a vanilla date, but calling it SM.
Yeah. Well,
So
and then, she's been, she wasn't going to ask him out for a beer at one point because it might be abusing her power. But then she
yeah.
tries to abuse her power by saying, I think we should go out on a date. That's an order. And I'm like, okay, so that's not how you ask someone to change a relationship. Is you don't order them to accept a change in relationship. This is where you are not in a scene and you negotiate, which doesn't seem to be a word. Do you recall that anyone saying negotiate at all in the English translation or subtitles?
No. I mean, like, it's almost like she just dumped the contract on him and said, take it or leave it. And there wasn't, you see, this is something I've noticed, not just in this, but in so many other treatments of SM in mainstream media, is that even where it's like, they talk about consent, you very rarely see the process of negotiation between play partners. You very rarely see them actually talking about, I like this, but not that. I have this health problem, things like that. Like, in fact, like to be fair to 50 Shades of Grey, they do talk about consent. They do have a scene of them negotiating the contract, which they don't actually sign, but that's a whole other thing to talk about. That they do talk about consent and negotiation. So, and I'm very frustrated by the sort of that so many of them, even ones that are supposed to be relatively realistic, don't talk about consent.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of rare in general. Like there's this, remember the Lena Dunham Girls show on HBO? I don't know if you've seen that, but
I haven't seen it. No.
there is a scene where I think it's in the second season where a girl, one of them is dating Adam Driver's character. And they actually have, it's not a kink scene, but they actually have a scene of negotiations, of sexual negotiation, vanilla sexual negotiation, where she says, I'm up for this and not that. And, and they're talking about it. They're not like, it's not like they're just about to have sex. She's talking about it in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, that's actually pretty rare to see. Even in movies and TV shows that are sexually explicit, you rarely see people sort of like taking the time to talk about that in advance and say, I'm up for this, but not that. And this is my absolute hard limit. Never do that to me. But, I'm okay. And we can always talk about, there's things we can talk about later. So that's a rare thing to see. And I wish we'd seen that here rather than just like it. I mean, it looks like she just dumped the contract on him. We're going to do X, Y, and A, B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And he just agreed to that and never changed his mind, never spoke up about anything. So yeah, that's where another point where the at least as an illustration of good practices, where it falls down.
Yeah. So most of my stories, as you know, are science fiction or fantasy, some horror, but every now and then I do write contemporary modern piece. And whenever I write something that's contemporary and modern, I always address these issues of negotiation and consent in them in some fashion. And I have literally had readers, fans come to me and say, I like your other stuff. I don't like when you do that. in your contemporary
Mm.
fiction. I don't want to read that.
Yeah, I
And
think
I'm
it's
like, wow, like,
I think it's like it's the myth of the zipless fuck that like somehow two people can just like, come together, the music swells, the clothes just fall off and all that. And the idea that you actually have to put some forethought into having a good sexual experience with somebody is people don't like to be reminded of that.
yeah, yeah. So after they have this scene that goes kind of wrong at the Arboretum, in
Yeah,
part because they're seen with the handcuffs and they are interrupted because Hemi needs help. She's been
yeah,
attacked at her date. But also, we mentioned this before. Jihu stands up at one point with the blindfold, like we're not in a relationship yet. He, for the first time, says no
yeah,
to Jiwoo, and he's like,
yeah,
"No, we shouldn't date." And that
yeah,
is, I think, you can tell from the look on the actress's face, her body language, that is devastating. But they have this immediate problem with her friend that they need to deal with.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And that's when she hears Jaime, sorry. But like I said, the hostess of the dog park bar, she's the one, complaining about fake doms who only want sex, and that makes
yeah,
her feel bad for her desires. So
yeah,
that leads to problems uh between her and so she sort of like clamps down on that part of herself.
yeah. And this is the first time we see Jihu actually not wear the glasses one day in the office.
Yeah,
And he's not wearing them. It happens to be the day that Jiwoo also calls in sick for the first time and doesn't come in because it
yeah,
affects her intensely. But we see them in the office again. He's wearing the glasses again, but they're not. It's clear, like, to people around them that something's happened. Um, Yuna mentioned it explicitly, like, what happened to you two? I thought things were going well. I believe Wang also mentions to Jihu at one point when they're talking, he, like, he looks back at Jiwoo, and Jihu is kind of, he's kind of like, what's going on there? So people around them have noticed that they're getting
mm,
closer, and now there's this distance between them. But in the end, she decides, for whatever reason, she's going to fulfill the contract, and they're going to have this scene that they apparently have talked about.
yeah,
And this is at his house,
mm,
and they do this really nice intersperse of him making dinner and her
yeah.
preparing
Super
some
fancy
rope.
gourmet stuff.
Yeah, and she's
Like,
like preparing ropes, which,
oh yeah, she dyes her own rope. She like Vaseline. She runs it through the fire. It's like she's putting she's not just buying it off the store. She's making her own.
yeah, and they go to these, really ex- extremes, and then Hana bursts in and just
Yeah,
destroys it. And she, at first she's just annoying, and
yeah,
he builds up the courage, basically say, I think that I'm not wrong. I think that I'm not messed up. This is just me, and
yeah,
this is okay. And I get the feeling like she would have just left at that point, but the phone rings, and I think it's
yeah,
Jiwoo saying, I'm on my way, and that
yeah,
pisses her off.
yeah. And it's just sheer spite and jealousy.
Yeah,
Why if you don't like this man so much, why are you hanging around him, and why are you like going to the trouble of interfering in his relationships? Let him, get on with your life.
and this is the first time those two women see each other.
Yeah, they just
Um,
like look at each other on the entryway or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Oh, I love that bit where she just as an aside, I love the bit where Jiwoo practices the bondage on her like stuffed stuffed mascot figure.
yeah, who
And
who is their safe word? The name of that
yeah,
character is their safe word.
yeah, she's got like a little laptop set up and she's practicing. Okay, well, all right, yeah. um,
Yeah, but so their dinner, I guess, doesn't happen. We kind of skip that part because
Yeah.
she comes in and then suddenly we're in the bedroom. It's another
Yeah.
bondage scene.
I mean, like they're realistically, there probably should have been a conversation like, what the hell happened with the dinner? Like, and he'd probably be very apologetic about that. And she say, doesn't matter. That's, or does she, just, I don't know. I feel like there was a scene missing there that we should have had.
Yeah, like what do they do with this food? Like, does he say, well, you eat it, because this is my fault, I let her in, or do they split the food? I mean,
Yeah.
that felt a little rushed. And then they
Yeah.
have this scene where it's visually nice again because he's all in black but the rope's red.
Yep.
And I and she ties him up and then she slaps him relatively gently and then pretty harshly.
Yeah.
And I will say that made me cringe a little bit because when
Yeah.
I was in the scene, I was raised like, if you're going to slap someone, you always put your hand on the other side of their head because you don't want
Yeah.
to risk the neck. And I know he's laying down, so there's only so far his head can go, but still you could do some serious damage. But again, as we said, it's not so much
Yeah.
realistic.
I also think I think that's like a very that's more emotionally intense than just the physical, that is where that was like, okay, I'm really going to I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt that this is consensual and negotiated. But I kept feeling like, okay, I mean, face slapping is a hard limit for me. So
Yeah. And that's one of the things I like to do, but that's why I know how to do it more safely because if you're going to do stuff that's edgy, you need to know how to do it as safely as possible.
Yeah.
And then she makes a comment like, this is our final play, so let's not have any regrets. And so he grabs her and starts passionately kissing her, and this is too much for her. This is him giving her traditional vanilla affection that's passionate. And this is the first time I heard her in the movie call him by his first name. She pulls away and she's like, stop it, Jehu, stop it.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, he's still bound at this point, but he has like his wrist together, so he's putting his hands over her like that. So yeah,
and she unties his hands and they have this, and he apologizes again, which he's constantly doing, apologizing, and she wants to know what for, and he can't tell her what for. And so instead he goes into this thing which he said before about how she's his son. And I think what he's saying kind of poetically is, I'm scared of being emotionally intimate with you, and it's just too much for her. And she just like leaves, and we have never seen her before not pick up, clean up, fix up things after a planned scene. And she just leaves, and a really sad scene of her back with the stuffed animal and untying it and just devastated. And then this leads into like, the whole, they get caught at work.
The recording.
Yeah, which Han sends to her and stupidly sends
his
the entire group
recorder.
again. Yeah,
his little like, I guess he's a Zootopia fan or something.
And and this showed that she's actually, I mean, this could have been devastating, and I think it was devastating because of how we see her react. But she's also not going to let it control her, because I noticed that when she goes to the office and she has to talk to the manager who yells at her, and rightly should, because they not only did something they shouldn't do at the office, but they damaged stuff at the office and made a mess.
Oh my God, it broke my back scratcher.
Yeah. Well, they threw paper all over the place, and things like that,
and Jehu even gave him a replacement back scratcher, which is like, has like, cat claws and things.
Yeah.
I guess it's the latest in back scratcher technology.
Yeah. So the clothes she has on that when she leaves later on, we see she goes to talk to Han because
Yeah.
she's kind of wants to get ahead of this. And we hear her reason out, I don't think we're the only people who are recorded. I bet there are other, it's kind of like, I know there are people doing stuff at work that they shouldn't be doing. How much you want to bet it's recorded? And she goes to see Han and she's like, you're going to quit anyway. Which I kind of got the feeling was, is she telling him to quit, or is she just realizing he will, you need to help me? And then we start getting all these people playing that, their manager is trying to have an affair. One of the guys
we're talking about bringing in
committee is
escort for the business meeting.
Doing all this stuff. And so I feel like that was her protecting herself, but also him. That corporate disciplinary thing was weird. And this might be the difference between, I'm not in the corporate world, or it could be a difference between American corporate world and Korean corporate world. I don't know how quote unquote realistic it is, but that was just entirely weird, that scene, in my opinion.
Well, it came down to a question of sort of like, like Ji-woo sort of made his big heartfelt confession to her in front of other people. And Ji-woo basically said, okay, our actions were wrong, but ourselves are not wrong.
Yeah.
And we'll just be perverts outside the office.
Yeah. And their managers are just like, they want the details. Like, what did you do? What's your relationship like? But I think the head guy, whoever he is, when, Ji-woo's making the confession, like, I do like you. I do want to date you. I will date you. Will you, he's like, he's looking at like he's watching a rom-com, right? He's emotionally invested. The other guy's just like eating like a peanut, and he like gives him a glare like, are you kidding me? You're interrupting this beautiful scene with your stupid crunching. It was very, it was strange, but it still felt right for their characters.
Yeah.
Like, she's trying
I think we may be looking at sort of a convention of the genre, of like the big heartfelt confession and things like that. So but I think is that she basically says that, like, Ji-woo says, I have a personal life, and I keep it, it does not reflect on my ability in the workplace. It does not reflect on so she basically says, she says a boundary, like, she's the one who says there is a boundary between my personal life and my professional life. But Ji-woo says, he breaks down a boundary. He says, there's, it's not just I love playing with you, but I love being with you too.
Yeah.
And that matters. And there doesn't need to be a separation between the two.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. It's like that he, instead of his challenge is to be more emotionally open and with her, and her challenge is to basically break out of this, the perfect corporate woman style, and just say, yeah, I made a mistake. Okay. And so what are you gonna do about it? So, and basically, I think she almost says, well, if I get fired, I get fired, and it's worth it. So it's like, she's not the perfect corporate woman. She's willing to admit her that is more to her, and she doesn't fit that mold.
Yeah. And after they leave, and she says, let's do both. Let's date and do DS. We can rewrite the contract. And I get the feeling they might actually this time negotiate and write a contract that's useful for them.
I'm hoping they did
he's
negotiate
like,
the first time around.
This is worth getting fired for. And she's like, oh, we'll see about that. And that's when we have the flash, kind of flashback to what she's done, correct it. And there are consequences. in the Korean version with the English, they print out what's on those sheets on the wall in their office. And there are 8 of them. There are 8 disciplinary actions that happen. So it's not just them. They each have one. She's suspended. She doesn't get paid for 3 months, which I was like, holy shit. He doesn't get paid for 6 months. But the other 6, there are people who've been fired and people who've quit. And I believe one of them is Wong, because now Yuna seems to be like, this is part of your punishment. You're going to set up the venue areas. And I like this exchange them. And Jiho's like, okay. And she's like, well, are you going to quit if it's too hard? She goes, I might. She's like, okay. So even though we see Yuna was upset by the initial revelation, she doesn't seem to care. It's like, now we're back to work. You're at work. We don't see him at work. So maybe he actually couldn't come in the office because he was higher up or something.
I'm a little unclear. I thought the notification says he was suspended for a period.
Yeah, it says for 6 months. Hers is she doesn't get paid for 3 months. So does that mean she comes into work but doesn't get paid? I don't know. I think I think TV shows in general that are not in an audience's principal language, when they do all these subtitles and translations, I really wish, and it's not just this movie, but all movies, they would translate things like this. Because if you're spending time showing them on the screen, there should be a reason for that. And I feel like this movie did a pretty good job of it. Didn't have a lot of unnecessary stuff. Almost everything came back or played into something else. And we talked about negotiating. This is when we actually start seeing them negotiate. They're walking in the park and she finally says, so you like to be bitten? And I'm like, oh my God, this is a conversation you should have before.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But it turns out he wants to go really slow in terms of the vanilla stuff.
Yeah.
And so he's all gung-ho for the kink stuff, but now the vanilla stuff's really slow.
Oh, and now she's gonna leave a big bite mark. Probably where it's visible.
I hope he literally isn't suspended, because he's going to have to pull up a high collar to cover that.
Yeah.
And then at the end, we see them in his bedroom. They've installed an eye hook.
Yeah.
To make their bondage a little more attached, and they're back to the puppy scene, but now it's combined with flogging. And he finally says he loves her.
And she's wearing his shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that shows how intimate they are. So so that's our big, and then we get the closing narration, right?
Yeah, which is when we see Lee Han is typing. That's where we see he has that little icon of femme at the end, and I'm like, oh, has he been femme the entire time?
Yeah,
how much does he know?
Yeah, I was a little confused about that, because I thought femme is that a separate? I mean, I know there was the person wearing the bunny mask, which I know is Lee Han, because he has the carrot recorder pin. I was assuming that the person talking about femdom with the female voice, that person was a separate person, but I may have misinterpreted that. So I thought that a little odd. Is it he also has a female scene persona? I'm not sure how that works exactly.
Yeah, maybe he does. He's clearly at a different office, because the posters and stuff on the wall. So he's at a new job, and he apparently hasn't learned the lesson of don't do stuff at work. But
but it's I like that it's a romance with a happily ever after. But I also like that it's they become they're a female dominant, male submissive relationship that has a happily ever after, or even happily for now. And it shows that's rare enough in and of itself. It's also rare in that we see a relatively realistic portrayal of a woman going, learning about female dominance, learning about that role, and progressing through it through self-discovery. And that's also extraordinarily rare.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, like so often when you see female doms in mass media, you get the impression they were born like this and never had to learn anything along the way. And furthermore, that she's not in a commercial sex work type of situation, that she's doing this out of her own pleasure in relationships. So that's already sets it so far above outside so much of the mainstream depictions of SM.
Yeah, I really liked it. I have recommended it on numerous online forums and groups, which is part of why I wanted to do this with you, because I wanted your feedback since you're studying. You're writing about on your blog. Will you tell everyone the name of your blog? We'll make sure we put it up for people to
Yeah,
find too.
it's historyofbdsm.com, and I'm currently so I'm currently posting a lot of movie and television reviews, um, of different movies with and TV shows with SM in them, and I'm trying to go back. I'm trying to go in depth as well and go back and like look at early stuff like the original 1975 story of O,
Mhm.
things like that.
Yeah, and I like reading that, so I recommend people read that because I
Thank you.
like how you go in depth and you also look at what's going on in the culture and in at the same time
Yeah.
to give it context. I would say, someone who is interested in femdom male sub or kink relationships in general might like this. I have
Mm-hmm.
noticed, I've seen a couple reviews, and one of the criticisms I see in this movie is that people say it's not sexy enough. And I have wondered if that plays into the whole female versus male gaze thing that you brought up,
Mm.
that they're just not used to that. They're not
Yeah.
used to focusing on the female body. They're not used to kink not having explicit sexuality or more implied in
Yeah.
sexuality. Because
Yeah.
I
You
found
can.
it very sexy and sensual.
Yeah. That's. I mean, if you like the first 50 Shades of Grey movie was directed by a woman, and there was a relative de-emphasis on looking at the female lead's body and more emphasis on looking at the male. And when they replaced the director in the subsequent two in the trilogy, you could really see that there was a definite shift in the emphasis, more looking at Dakota Johnson as Anna, and more of her nude, more of her in revealing outfits, and less of an emphasis on Jamie Dornan's body. So I think that that's definitely something. Well, like I said, it's like the female gaze is so deeply embedded in cinema, in film and television, how we look at people, that we're not quite sure how to look sensually at men when they're not, like, we have to build like the situation of war or sports or something like that to be allowed to sort of like erotically look at men. And a movie like this, where I think there's greater emphasis on her looking at him sensually, doesn't quite make sense to some people, that they may not even be able to explicitly say why it's wrong, but
Mm-hmm.
that it's wrong to them. It violates the rules they've assimilated.
Yeah, and this movie is directed by a woman,
Mm.
and she wrote the screenplay based on the
Ah,
web comic. I don't know if the webcomic is drawn by a man or a woman, though. I can't say that yet. I don't know enough about it. But when I was looking up background stuff for the movie, I thought that was really interesting. Also, I learned that the main male character, the actor, was
yeah.
told when he took this job, you need to put on some weight. And so he put on the equivalent of 20 pounds. And then apparently after they started shooting, director said, I need you to put on a little more weight. They wanted it to be muscle because
Yeah.
and I don't know if anyone out there knows and watch this and can leave us a comment and let us know. I'm curious as to if they use stunt doubles or this was all like pulled impact play, or if the actors actually did this, because he is so
Yeah.
good at his reactions I
Yeah,
would
that's a
say
good
that
question.
he's actually feeling it sometimes, it looks to
Yeah,
me.
like a lot. Something else I've noticed when looking at impact play is that a lot of times they will sort of like it's shot like the way Hitchcock directed the infamous shower scene. So you get like sort of violent motion, very rapid cuts, and you see like the arm in motion, but you don't see the actual impact.
Mm-hmm.
So here, for example, we did actually see like either it actually happened or they did something very amazing with special effects or something. Um, and also, I I don't think they did body doubles either. I think it looks like him all the time. So there's so there's often so this is not like sort of cheating and shooting around the impact. You actually do see the impact. You actually do see you see the wax hitting somebody's
Yeah.
skin.
Yeah.
It's not clear who exactly it is. I don't think we actually saw him with the wax on him.
No, we see the
So
back with the wax and then we see his facial reactions, but
yeah,
not in the same.
there might have been some body double trickery there, but um, I don't know. Like in Maîtresse, the French film, I understand they actually got real kinky men from the Paris kink community to be the submissives in the scenes with um, Ariane, Mistress Ariane. So maybe they got some sort of stunt bottom to do actual hot wax play on or something.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for talking with me about this.
Yeah.
It was fun. I know we talked a long time, but trust me, my family here
Yeah.
is grateful I have someone else to talk to.
I want to, one more thing I want to bring up is that in both Secretary and 50 Shades of Grey, there's the SM relationship is very private. And they're like one of my least favorite parts of Secretary is the bit where Lee, Maggie Gyllenhaal's character, tries to meet other people in the scene, and they're all freaks. And I know that like there's creepy people in the scene. I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to excuse that, but it's like she feels no support from anybody else. She feels no understanding. And in 50 Shades, it's like, there's no contact with other people in the world at all. You'd think that there is no scene. I do like that even though they don't talk, they don't meet other kinky people in person, there is a community they both interact with online. And I think that's good that they show that the kink scene, has both negative, which is like the guy that Jaime meets with
Yeah.
and who abuses her, and positive sides in that they get feedback and ideas and support from other people in the community. So I think that's a definite improvement over some other depictions.
Yeah, and I think Jaime or Himi, once she figures out what they're doing, I mean,
Yeah,
Jihu can come and talk to her, and I would like to think that maybe Jiwoo is also doing the same thing. And so now
yeah,
they've got this small group that they can talk to. And
yeah,
apparently, within the movie's context, we're supposed to believe that this is popular enough that there are hotels that they can
yeah,
rent out that have like these theme rooms or fantasy rooms that you could play in.
yeah.
Um, and
That's a thing in Japan, and I'm guessing they have it in Korea too. So
yeah, from what I could piece together, there are like kink clubs, S&M bars
mm,
and clubs and things like that
yeah,
for sure.
maybe Jaime's dog park bar will be the first munch in Korea.
There you go. That sounds great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Peter.
It's been a pleasure.